We are so honored to have you join us for this episode of Beyond the Loss. I'm Aditi Leverage, bereaved parent to 2 and parent to 1 living child. I'm a specialized pregnancy and infant loss coach and founder of the registered charity, the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center.
And I'm Danyelle Kaluski, bereaved parent to my daughter Emelina and parent to 2 living daughters. I am the co-founder and director of operations for the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center. On this show, we share real stories about parenting and healing through pregnancy and infant loss. We allow space for the often silenced truths around loss to be heard. We offer an affirmative space for all people impacted by loss to share their stories, their triumphs, and their healing.
Please remember that the stories shared are personal stories and are not to be used in replacement of professional advice. Please visit our charity link in the show notes for additional support should you need.
We are so excited to have you join us for today's episode. Let's start talking.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Loss. Today we are joined by Rachel Whalen. Rachel Whalen is a mother, writer, and advocate for the pregnancy and infant loss community. After enduring 2 miscarriages and the stillbirth of her daughter Dorothy, she began to write about her experiences on her blog, An Unexpected Family Outing. Her blog quickly became a source of validation and comfort for those who had experienced their own heartbreak. That blog has now expanded into an online community where others can connect with Rachel as she writes about grief, loss, parenting after loss, and the trauma our bodies endure with these losses. There are so many ways to experience the heartbreak of having your child die, and Rachel wants people to know that there is space and validation for all grief in her community. An Unexpected Family Outing is a place for everyone so that you never have to be alone. We are so excited, Rachel, to connect with you in this space. We had you as a keynote speaker at our first annual virtual Bereavement and Beyond conference, and it was just so amazing to have you and have you close out that conference. But we're really excited to further that conversation in this space. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have another opportunity to sit down with you and Danyelle a little more intimately. So thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. As we ask all of our guests that come on, can you share a little bit about your story and kind of what has led you into this space?
Yeah, so I think like everybody who's experienced any kind of loss, there's the long version, and then I'll give you the Cliff Notes version because it's complicated as everyone's experiences are. I started trying to build my family with my husband in 2015, and we experienced a miscarriage pretty early on. Our first pregnancy we lost at about 5-6 weeks gestation, and then later on, a few months later, I became pregnant again, and that baby died at 9 weeks. And shortly after that miscarriage, about a month later, I found out I was pregnant with what would be my daughter Dorothy, and I carried Dorothy for 30 weeks. At about 28 weeks, I was diagnosed with severe preeclampsia and was admitted to the hospital on bed rest. A long, complicated week full of lots of ups and downs, which ultimately ended with Dorothy dying in utero, and I had a stillbirth, a vaginal stillbirth. And then I also kind of didn't fully succumb, but was battling preeclampsia and then HELLP syndrome. And so after Dorothy was delivered, I spent some time fighting for my own life and dealing with a lot of medical trauma. And about a week later, I was discharged from the hospital to go home without my baby. And my husband and I spent the next year kind of trying to figure out what this life was going to be like. And in the midst of that, we found out we were pregnant with my daughter, Frances, who's my living baby. And around the time I got pregnant with Frances, I started blogging a little bit, mostly for family and friends, and then slowly that turned into writing for a wider audience. And around the time Frances was I want to say like 3 or 4 months old, I started writing for Still Standing magazine online and sharing my story there. And over time, that audience and the audience for my own blog kind of came together to form this community that I'm now a part of today. It's been about 5, well, I don't know, it's like in between 5 and 6 years now of writing and sharing online. And I now have a pretty strong Instagram community that I've surrounded myself with. I'm also on Facebook. I have a blog that I don't regularly update anymore, but you can find my past writings there. And we just really have, over time, evolved into a place that wasn't just for me, but was for anybody who'd known a loss of any kind. And I just wanted a place for people to kind of come and set their grief down.
I love that, and of course I've been following your journey since the standing days as well, and your words resonate with so many in the bereaved community. Why do you think it is what do you think it is about your words and your style of showing up in that space that really resonates with people?
I think, and I've also heard from people that it's because they feel there's an authenticity from me and an authenticity from what I write. And that means a lot to me because I really do. I don't try to be authentic. I just try to write what's on my heart, on my mind. And so for people to recognize that it's my authentic self, I think it's very validating for me. I have had moments where I've maybe tried to speak on a subject or speak on a topic that maybe wasn't a lived experience for me or wasn't something that I had a deep connection with. And when I look back at those pieces, I can feel that it's a little bit contrived, right? And those are pieces that kind of, looking back, I remember them falling a little bit flat. And so I know the things that resonate most with my audience are when I just kind of say out loud. I try to say out loud the things that, are tumbling around in my head, that I know are tumbling around in other people's heads, but we often think we're the only one thinking it, or we're the only one who's had that thought. And I've just found such power for myself and for our community when I just say something out loud. And then, you see the comments start to roll in, like, this is me, I've been thinking this and I haven't been able to find the words for it. And so I really, over time, have found myself being a voice for people who are still trying to find the ways to express themselves. And I believe everyone's story is their own to share. So when you come to my space, I'm sharing my story, but I'm also using my platform as a place to make space for other stories that, are different from my own, because my loss experience is my experience. And even if someone else has had 2 miscarriages and a stillbirth, it may not look or have been lived in the same way. And so I really want I feel like when people come to my space, they're either drawn by what I'm saying and maybe what they stay for is the fact that I'm, created a network, or I can be a resource for connecting them to organizations like yours, or, TFMR communities, or, communities that are specifically geared toward infant loss or NICU families. And so I really just try to be kind of like a hub in a wheel and help people connect to all the different spokes that are out there.
Yeah, and I can say that you've been really, really good at that, because we share so many of your quotes and things like that in our helpline and our group facilitator trainings. They're kind of one day you should come sit in on that. You'd be like a celebrity for everybody, because they're so authentic and they're real and they're raw and they're unfiltered, and they're exactly that. They're the thoughts that I think so many of us, regardless of kind of our experiences and the differences in our experiences, there's that commonality of like the emotional piece and the thoughts that flow through us. And so your words and your page really give space for people to connect to that, like the humanity underneath the experience, which is really powerful.
Thank you. That means a lot.
I have a question. So your journey into parenthood has been, one of loss.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Same with me when I have a living child now, but my first two pregnancies were also ended in loss. And so you had two miscarriages and then a
Yeah.
stillbirth.
Yeah.
How did you find it in you, the space of like picking love, I guess, over the fear of the worst happening again in your pregnancy with your living daughter?
Yeah. I get asked this question a lot, and and this is where sometimes being authentic doesn't come across as maybe eloquent. People ask me all the time, like, how did you cope with, you know, attempting to become pregnant again after your loss and then being pregnant? And the honest answer is, I don't really know how I did it. I just did it. It was, looking back, it was fueled by a lot of just sheer desperation. I had no living children. I had been through, in the course of basically a year. My first miscarriage was in February of 2015, and Dorothy died in February 2016. So in a year, I'd been pregnant 3 times and had 3 babies die. And so there was just this feeling of like, I just had to keep going. And honestly, I think what really kind of gave me the feeling of like it was now or never was because of the preeclampsia I'd had. When we went to our 6-week postpartum appointment, I'd asked the doctor what would it look for me? Like, was it safe for me to try again? And she actually told me that, she shared some research with me that when you've had preeclampsia, there's a lot of studies being done about kind of within the year conceiving would increase your likelihood of a healthier pregnancy. Something kind of this idea of like your body being more primed for it and like ready for it. And so we read through the research, we, talked to the doctor. I had kind of a whole medical team at that point because of the complications from Dorothy's pregnancy. And so we just felt really, I felt like if we were going to lose another baby, if another baby was going to die, I at least knew I had every kind of tool that I could have. And I was going to therapy at the time. My husband was going to therapy with me. I just felt like, okay, desperation. And also it's kind of this moment where we're never going to have this much support probably again. So let's just move forward and see what happens. And Francis's pregnancy was really uneventful. It was a very boring pregnancy by all definitions, which is amazing and awesome. And I'm so grateful for that. And also, I spent a lot of my time waiting for, the shoe to drop, right? I'm waiting for preeclampsia to come back because my chances of developing preeclampsia again were very high because there's a lot of connections to like there's a correlation to like how early preeclampsia comes, how severe it is, whether or not the baby lives. These are all kind of factors that, upped my chances of getting it again. So I just didn't quite believe that I would make it. I thought at best I would get preeclampsia and the baby would live. So to not end up being diagnosed with preeclampsia and having Frances be living was not, I mean, honestly, up until she was born, I was still expecting them to come in and tell me that, my health was compromised or something was wrong. But so it was just a lot of, anxiety, but just taking it one moment at a time. I really just kind of had this mantra in my head that, like, right now in this moment, I'm pregnant. If whatever else happens, like, this moment is mine, and no one will ever be able to take that away from me and my baby. So for right now, I'm pregnant. I don't know what's going to happen in 5 minutes or 6 hours or tomorrow, but right now. And so that is a tool I do share with people who reach out to me about being pregnant after loss, is just really taking it moment by moment, leaning into the fear, leaning into the anxiety because it's going to be there, and also just giving yourself permission to feel how you feel. You don't have to love it. You don't have to feel excited about it. You get to, decide what that pregnancy looks like because it's yours.
That's so beautiful and so aligned, like with the work that I do with clients who are pregnant after loss too, right? Is not trying to push that away. I understand that's very normal and it's going to be there and that's okay. And taking it like moment to moment, I think is really good. good advice. I was going to ask something and then I completely forgot because I was getting so immersed in what you were what you were saying. Danielle, I'm going to turn it to you because it's going to come back to me, and I know it will, but it's not there at the very second.
I was gonna say, I think you said something that really resonated with me, which is you don't have to like it. I think that I know my experience is that because I had experienced a stillbirth and now I was pregnant with my subsequent child, I felt like I couldn't complain. I couldn't like be uncomfortable. And yet it was probably the most pain I've ever been in my life. Like my body just did not like that pregnancy. And I never allowed myself to complain or say anything bad because I was like, I should just be so grateful. So the fact that share the fact that you don't have to like it, I think it opens up a space for people to kind of, like you said, lean into those emotions, good or bad. Like, I don't know, when you shared the story, did you ever feel like the leaning into the good or the bad, so those, uncomfortable feelings, whether it's physical or emotion, was that something that came natural to you, or was that something that you really worked on through that pregnancy?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it was something that I was working on. Like I said, I was in therapy at the time, and I really was unpacking a lot in therapy about how important it was to, hold space for that and piece, leaning into these conflicting emotions and giving space to them and not trying to force one or the other. And so it was definitely something I had to work at. I think it was easier when it was just kind of me and like my husband. And I had a few other kind of like safe people. I think where it's hard is when you go out into the world, and even like, our families just wanted everything to be happy, right? Like I think if I was uncomfortable or upset about something or worried about something, it scared them that, maybe something bad was going to happen. They didn't want to tap into that. No, no, no. We just have to think positively. And I actually saw something today on Instagram that I wish I had seen when I was pregnant with Francis. It's that idea that like negative thoughts, like there's people who think like if you think positively, positive things will happen. Well, I've been there and I've thought positively and tragic things have happened. So I know that that doesn't work that way. Like obviously thinking positively, there are benefits to it. It's helpful. It's good for your stress levels, all that. But the opposite is true too. Like thinking negative thoughts doesn't actually make negative things happen. I mean, there are people who believe that, and I try to hold space for everybody and what works for them, but I just know that's not true. And for me, I'm diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, and one of the things I've learned about myself and in my anxiety is if there are blanks to fill in, I will fill them in with the worst possible scenario. So it's actually better for me to just kind of acknowledge the bad or the negative. And that was another thing I did during my pregnancy with Francis was I wanted all the info. I wanted all the information, the good, the bad, the in between. I wanted, it all laid out there. And I think my doctors were a little hesitant to do that because again, like, oh, we don't want you to worry about that. And I finally said to one of them one day, well, I'm already worried about it. So can you just help me worry a little less by telling me like what I'm looking for here? Because if you don't tell me, I'm going to be up all night tonight, probably turning to Google, which we all know is like not where I should be going, or I'm going to come up with some scenarios for myself. And so I think that I had to work on getting other people to support me and leaning into those hard feelings and helping others to recognize like it's okay. Like I'm totally entitled to being terrified. Like you need to let me have the space to do that. And that is also supportive, right? It's supportive to meet me where I am. It's not supportive to force me or invalidate my emotions in another direction. So yeah.
Yeah, it's actually more supportive to say you're entitled to feel
Yes.
terrified rather than like, don't worry about that. Like I also live with anxiety, and telling someone who lives with anxiety to not worry is like putting fuel on a fire. Like, whereas
Because
it's
then
like,
I'm like,
okay.
wait, why don't you think I should be worrying?
Yeah.
Why are you saying that? You
Yeah,
only
yeah.
be
Do you
saying
know
that if there's
something I
something
don't
for me to
know?
worry about. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I totally feel that. And something that you had said earlier was like, you were with your pregnancy with Francis, you were kind of like always waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't drop, but anxiety will tell us that it will. That's totally was my experience as well, and that actually went like followed me into my postpartum with my living child. I thought that after he was born that I would have leaned in and realized that the other shoe wasn't going to drop. But that never happened for me. And I don't know that it still hasn't happened for me. So, and my child is going to be 8. What has your experience been like in terms of the postpartum after bringing home a living
Yeah.
child?
I completely relate to what you were saying about that. I mean, I have written about this before. Like when Frances was born, it was an amazing feeling to hold her and feel her warm body and hear her cry and have her be alive and breathing. But I was a little, I don't know, taken aback by, I thought I was expecting more of a relief. Like I was expecting more of like a shoulders dropping, like, okay, whew, we did it. I can do this. The worst is behind us. And then, I just had this moment in the hospital where it's like, oh my God, I'm never going to stop worrying about this kid, like being here with me in this world. Like, what have I done? Like, and I had a lot of moments in her first year where, and again, like, if you've dealt with any kind of anxiety or grief triggered like worries or anything like that, that these irrational thoughts kind of worm their way into your mind. And all throughout Frances's first year of life, I had this irrational thought that just was constantly in the back of my head, that she would only live to be a year. That in my mind, I felt like I had this clock and like I'd get her for a year, because in my mind, like, the way my pregnancies had worked, it was like 5 weeks, 9 weeks, 30 weeks. Okay, living baby, but when will this one end? And it took, I had to develop a lot of kind of coping strategies to quiet that voice, because it could really take over, especially at nighttime, constantly needing to check on her and make sure she was breathing, became kind of an expert at, you know, creeping across the room and placing, a hand on her back. And I would do this thing where I'd need to feel like 3 breaths in and out. And then I could like go back and lie down. And if I'd get nervous in the middle of the night, I would go in and I would do that and like put my hand on her like belly or her back and okay, 3 breaths. Okay, she's good. And like go back. And over time, that level of intensity has lessened, but you still worry. It's just, I think, you can't worry at that level all the time, or I wouldn't be coping, right? So I had to develop like strategies and ways for me to cope with that. And one of the things that I will just do with my husband is just say to him, like, I'm thinking a thought, and he's like, just say it out loud. And I just say it out loud. And sometimes that just helps. It just helps, again, that validation piece, to say it out loud to a person who isn't trying to convince me otherwise, and he'll just be like, wow, that sounds really scary. I'm like, it is really scary. It's like, what do you need? And I'm like, I don't know. I just needed to say it. And then sometimes when you say it out loud, it's like, okay, that's not true. What I'm thinking right now, like me thinking something terrible is going to happen to her. Right now, nothing terrible is happening to her. So again, holding on to that right now moment. But yeah, it's a struggle. And I think it takes a lot of people by surprise, right? Because when you're pregnant after a loss, you become you're so hyper vigilant during the pregnancy that about getting to having a living baby, that I gave almost zero thought to what it would be like to bring a baby home and take care of a baby and like have to, feed her and take care of her and rear her. And so I had to learn a lot about that experience as I was going through it.
Yeah. Oh, your words just again, like, speak to my heart. I was like, are we the same person? Because that is me in a nutshell. Like,
Yeah.
I had anxiety previous to pregnancy and infant loss.
Mm-hmm.
That exasperated the anxiety twofold. And yeah, still there's that level of worry that I think I carry that other parents who've never had loss don't,
Mm-hmm.
or previous anxiety don't carry. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a struggle, and I think it's something that, like, we actually don't talk about, right? There's a lot of like, well, now I have my living child, and there's a lot of these like rainbow posts and this like,
Yeah.
and it's almost as if that's it, the journey ends there. And for me, the journey really started to begin after my living child was born, because it ignited so much emotional
Yeah.
stuff for me, chaos, if you want to call it. And what you said about, being so hypervigilant in the pregnancy that you didn't even allow your mind to think about bringing a living child home. I hear that from clients all the time. Actually, just this week had a session with a client who's really struggling postpartum, and that's exactly what they said. They're like,
Mm-hmm.
I was focused so much on staying pregnant
Mm-hmm.
that I did not even think about what life with a baby was going to be like. And it really took them by surprise. It was a lot harder than they imagined. And I think that's something people don't talk about.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the things that are already stressful about being a parent can also trigger you and trigger your grief and your anxiety around your grief because, it's like you can't but you can't necessarily tap into the same types of coping strategies you did before your baby was born, right? So I couldn't just, once Francis was here, I couldn't just shut off and retreat, right? Because I had an infant who needed me and needed me to take care of her, and had very like loud, demanding ways of letting me know that because that's her job. And doesn't she know that I just need, like, I can't handle this. I need a break. And, I really felt very like vulnerable in that way of like, oh gosh, I have to now figure out how to lean into the grief and lean into the hard feelings, but also be present for the living baby that I so desperately wanted. And Danielle, like you were saying before, and like be grateful that she's here. And oh crap, this is really hard. And like, and I mean, I even remember in therapy figuring out that I wasn't a newborn person, and it felt really, I felt awful for thinking that because all I'd wanted was a baby. And now here I was saying out loud to another person, like, I don't like taking care of newborn babies. Like, I love my own, but I like don't enjoy this particularly. And I felt so trapped though. Like, who do you say that to? Because this is literally all you wanted, and it was hard to find an audience for that because you can't tell other lost parents who haven't, it's hard to know if you can tell that to other lost parents. And then you can't tell that to people who haven't had a loss because they're like, you have a baby, why are you complaining? And it's, you feel really, it can feel really isolating. And again, because I feel like that's one of the things about being in this lost community is you're just constantly traveling around trying to find where you fit in, even though you're not alone here because everybody's experiences are so different. You sometimes trick yourself into feeling like you need to find like your home base, and you really, what I've learned over these last 6 years is you really just spend a lot of time like in grief, like ebbing and flowing, right? Kind of drifting towards certain people for certain needs. And that's why I think it's so important to have organizations that can, and people who can connect you with a variety of places to tap into your grief because, my stillbirth moms aren't always the place to go with, they're not necessarily the place to go with pregnancy after loss questions. And then parenting after loss, you don't really want to go to the people who are pregnant. And, and then I've got like my preeclampsia people. And it's just, you've kind of got to build these little networks for yourself.
Yeah, oh gosh, you're speaking our language here because at the center, that's what we found with a lot of organizations, at least here in where we are in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
that serve the pregnancy and infant loss community. There's like one group. It's like if
Mm-hmm.
you've had pregnancy and infant loss, you come to this one peer support group. So when I founded the center, we were really intentional about we're going to create like, so we've got I think 7 or 8 specialized groups, so
That's
exactly
awesome.
that, like a parent and baby, so for those folks who have given birth to a living child after loss and pregnant after loss, and next steps for those that are trying to conceive, because yes, we all have that commonality, but there's nuances and specific emotions and complexities I think that come with different parts. And no, you won't find a group that's tailored 100% to your own experience. But hopefully, when we do more of that specialized support, people are finding people that can even more share that lived experience,
Oh,
even more intricately.
I'm sure they are. And I think that's so important. That's one of the things that drew me to pregnancy after loss support, the online community, was that their groups were geared towards specific types of losses, right? So, like, there's the main group, but then you can be in pregnancy after loss. Like, if you had a first trimester loss, second trimester, there's one for dads, there's one for people who are parenting after loss, trying to conceive. And I think that was one of my first experiences with seeing, like, oh, it is okay to compartmentalize these experiences to give people more of what they need, because you can't always speak to everybody. And I think sometimes it's a trap that I've fallen into before, is like trying to talk to everyone, and I can't, because I don't hold everybody's experiences. So I think that's why it's so important. It's heartbreaking how many of us are sharing this space, but it's also really uplifting for me as a person who helps connect other people, that there's so many options of who they can reach out to and where they can go.
Yeah, it's just so nice, to have spaces and this conversation and like the authenticity that you show up with, Rachel, like just having these conversations, because yeah, like both Danielle and I experienced our losses 9, 10 years ago, and wow, the amount of growth in the conversations and support and spaces and resources since that time
Mm-hmm.
has been like a game changer for this community. So we really appreciate like pages like yours and voices such as yours and all of the other ones out there, because it is so common and it's so impactful and unique that we need to start addressing that, instead of saying, oh, it's so
Mm-hmm.
common, so here's one place you can go to find all
Yeah,
your needs
yeah,
that offers one thing, right? Like we
yeah.
need to acknowledge that everybody heals differently and what resonates is different, and there's different types of families.
Mm-hmm.
That was another thing, like we were really intentional with the inclusivity piece at the
Mm-hmm.
organization. So like our language is very inclusive. Our groups, we don't call it a dads in loss group, we call it a partners in loss. So
Mm-hmm.
that's for anyone who identifies as a partner. And that's one thing that and we chatted about before we hit record, but that's one thing that I've really appreciated about your page, is that you also post like on your stories, like you'll share these things about inclusivity, and you'll talk about like, well, not you talking about it, but like you'll elevate those pages and those accounts that have those supports. And you mentioned before we hit record that you will post those things, and then sometimes you'll see people that unfollow you, and you kind of are like, okay, good, because it's like, well, this space isn't for you, which you kind of alluded to that just now by saying like, I'm not like, I used to talk to, and like for everyone, and you've sort of, I think over the 6 years, it sounds like, have really started to see who you're actually
Mm-hmm.
providing a space for.
Yeah,
Could you speak a little bit more about that?
yeah. I mean, I think when I first started doing this online game, I don't know what to call it, this online, building an online presence, I wasn't really totally sure. I wasn't clear on my why, right? I wasn't really sure what I was doing. Was this for me? Was this for others? Was I looking to build a big following? Is this for, like, am I trying to build an audience to work in a direction of an organization or a charity or a book, right? And over time, what I've just found that's driving me is I feel most at peace with the work I'm doing when I'm creating a space where others can see themselves, creating like windows and mirrors for people who don't always have those in the community. Because when I step back and look at our community as a whole, we are very supportive until we're maybe not very supportive. One of the things I've learned is like by not speaking up, by not creating a space, you are excluding people. And the way you create space is by deliberately saying like, I support Black mothers and families, right? I support all birthing people. I support partners, right? And by using language like moms or, dads or husbands or talking about couples in the binary only, I was realizing so there are people who are going to show up here and not feel like this is a space for them. And so it's a process. I'm not perfect. No one really is, right? We all need to make mistakes because that's how we learn and how we get better. But I really just felt most comfortable with my page in the last few months, last year, because I really have leaned into that. I really just want communities that are often marginalized or maybe don't feel the support to find that in my page, and not necessarily from me, because like you said, I write about my own experiences and my lived experiences, not everybody's. But that's when my role is I have a large platform, like I'm going to lift up other voices. There's other people out there doing this work. I don't need to do that work again. I can just show people like, oh, here is, Erica McAfee with Sisters in Loss. She's created this organization that's geared towards Black families and, and the experience of like being a Black person going through loss. And so that's what really kind of drives me. I'm always looking for ways to learn about more experiences and open up people's eyes to other experiences. And I've learned so much, and I really do mean it when I ask people to hold me accountable and call me in and call me out if that's what's necessary, because I'm not doing this. It's not a personal pride project, right? Like I'm really doing this to create a community, and community is about, all are welcome. And if by welcoming all people, you don't feel like it's the space for you, then I'm okay with you leaving, because that's what we do. Like, that's what I do. And one thing, and I'd be curious to hear where you all land on this too, because I've been getting a lot of pushback lately when I use inclusive language around like birthing people versus women or mothers, And so I'll be really frank right here for anyone who's wondering. If you've commented about how that's like ruining feminism or, putting women like out of the experience, I've deleted your comment, because there's no reason that someone needs to come into the space and see that there. Same thing goes for like, if I mention TFMR as in that community and somebody comes in and wants to portray that in a negative way, I've gotten the advice from other TFMR moms that it's best to just delete that, because they don't want to read it. They want to have to see it. And so that's one of those places where it's like, I'm not always going to get it right. Used to think that I had to like comment and show up and show that I was being an ally. And now I'm hearing from those who are part of those communities that, well, no, I don't need you to show me. I just don't want to have to read that. Like, so can you take that away so I don't have to come into your space and encounter that? And I was like, yes, I can. Like, that's totally doable. So,
and that's really what it means to create a truly affirmative space, right? It's that and I think that's what you're doing really beautifully with your page, and that's what we are actively every day intentionally doing as well, is that space of like, we're not, if you're uncomfortable with this, that's fine, but like we're affirming for everybody else who feels like they don't belong, that they do belong in the space. Because for me, as a racialized woman, when I experienced loss, I did not see myself represented in these spaces, especially in this part of Canada that I live. And that really and my first loss was very deeply ingrained with systemic racism that I experienced in the medical system. And so it really, really impacted how I moved through my loss. And so that's been a very intentional piece through it. And yeah, we say birthing person, we say partner. And yeah, there's been a couple of people, some volunteers who come on and, or, students, and they're like, I don't agree. And then we're like, okay, well then this isn't an organization for you. There's lots others. There are a lot of other spaces out there that maybe are a better fit for you. Right. But I think that's exactly, Rachel, what you were saying about becoming more clear on your why. I think that's what's happened with me, because I've been doing this work for same amount of time, 6 years, because you and I met through the Still Standing.
Yeah, we did.
We're kind of new in that space, and we started writing. And yeah, and then I became a lot more clear with my why, and since we're continuously going back to that why, and I think that that's important to hold that, because we're here to advocate for pregnancy and infant loss and holding our children at the forefront, but understanding that there's lots of people that experience this that have different stories, and they all deserve to have those stories be held.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm really grateful for, people like you and others who are taking that on and not afraid to do that, and I feel like the more of us who put that out there as this is the norm, this is the face. There isn't one face of this community. This community, loss doesn't discriminate. This is touching all kinds of lives and experiences. And, when people are maybe uncomfortable with that, I would question them and I have questioned them to why does acknowledging another person's lived experience threaten your lived experience? It doesn't, and there's a lot of quotes around the same idea of compassion's not pie, right? There's not a finite amount for everyone. And I kind of feel the same way about support. If I choose to highlight, Indigenous people and their losses, I'm not saying that if you're white, your loss doesn't matter, or if you're Black, your losses don't matter. I'm just saying this is a community that, should be elevated. And because in the past few years, I look around and I'm like, we've made white cisgender women, the default for this lost community. And we are not even the ones who are most impacted by loss, right? And so when you see statistics about how it impacts in, Black communities and Indigenous communities more than you're like, but then why am I only seeing white women? And that's because white cisgender women. And then I'm like, well, that's because you're not looking in the right places, right? It's not that those people aren't out there. They're out there and they're telling their story, but they need, sometimes they need platforms and people to help lift them up and pass the mic, right? Not speak for them.
Totally. When I started the organization, and I shared this with Danyelle, that when I started the organization and it's really started to get clear on my why, and that inclusive, advocating for our racialized members and our LGBTQ plus members. I said this to my father, who's obviously East Indian. Well, not obviously, he is East Indian. And, he's now 77 years old. And so I said this to him, and then he was like, okay, but as a charity founder now, you have to be very careful, because what if then the white people are upset by that? And I sat there for a second and I was like, wow. I said, Dad, this is exactly why we need to do this. I said, because that is the problem. I said, we can't, this is how we change the support systems. This is how we start to change it. And he kind of sat there and he was like, yeah, you're right. And then we were talking just about, I said, I'm one of the only, in Canada anyways, I'm one of the only racialized leaders in this space. And then he was kind of he sat there for a minute and thought about it. And he said, yeah, he said, do you know why that is? And I was like, no, I've been trying to figure it out. why there isn't more, right?
Yeah.
And you know, because I was thinking, you know, the stigma and the cultural like stuff, barriers around it, but he was like, it's because people of color don't know that they can.
Yeah.
They've never been told that they can.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, that was like a really profound
Yeah.
moment for me. And so I totally agree. It's like it's such a in interesting conversation, and one that I feel like we don't often have enough. And it's so refreshing, hey Danielle, to be able to talk to Rachel, who's like shows up in this space, who like gets it. Like you and I don't mean gets it like as in you get all the experiences, but you understand the importance of it in a way that a lot of people that we connect with don't.
Yeah. And like I said before, it's, you know, it's not about doing it perfectly or doing it right, right? Or I'm gonna make mistakes, and I have made mistakes, and I'm imagining I will make many more. But I also, the reason I'm making mistakes is because I'm putting myself out there, and I'm speaking up. And, you know, because it's really easy to not make any mistakes when you're just silent, but like that's being complicit, and that is not doing anything to create change, right? And we, like in the lost community, we talk all the time about like share your story, speak your truth. And it's like, and you, that's for everybody. And that means also, like, if you're going to share your story and speak your truth, like, you need to be ready to hear other stories and hear other truths, you know, like that may not be yours, but they belong to someone else. And just the way that you wouldn't want someone to invalidate your experience, like, I'm not here to tell people whether or not their loss is valid, because it is, because they're talking about it. And that's the bottom line.
Sorry, Danielle, you were unmuted, so I wanted to give you a chance. I didn't want to cut you off if you were going to say something.
I was, but then I lost my train of
Oh,
thought because
sorry.
it
They
just
keep
no,
doing
and you
that.
were I would rather lose my train of thought with comments and this what we're chatting about, because again, I'm a white cisgendered woman who saw myself in every blogger I looked for 10 years ago. I saw myself. I didn't see anybody of color. I didn't, I heard a few stories of, same sex couples because, there were some surrogacy stories that I had heard or seen, but I didn't see or hear any stories like the story that Aditi shares, with the community about her experience with racism, and then we have other people in our community who come and they share their stories with Aditi and she passes them on. And I'm like, is this the world we live in? Like, is this what people experience? And if it is, I want to do my best, much like you, Rachel, to just bring light and bring change. I don't want to hear that people aren't getting the support that they need in the hospitals and that is causing stillbirths, because I've experienced stillbirth and it is devastating. And I could not imagine that stillbirth because somebody didn't check or somebody didn't believe. My stillbirth was just, it was natural. I didn't do anything wrong. The midwives didn't do anything wrong. We didn't do anything wrong. And it was still devastating.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
what you're like hitting something that I feel like for the last like 4 or 5 years has been rolling around in my head, and I've been trying to find a way to say it. And maybe this is a place to say it is, when I look back on my experience of, 2 miscarriages and a stillbirth, never once have I had to wonder, would that have been different if if I was straight, if I was cisgender? Would that have been different if I was white, right? I don't have to wonder those things because I am, I'm heterosexual, I'm cisgender, I'm white. And so that is privilege right there. And I know that's hard for people to hear because, how do you associate the word privilege when you experienced a loss? I don't have that extra like weight on my experience of like, what if somebody had just listened to me, or what if my doctor had looked like me, or a nurse had looked like me and had listened to me, and I felt validated. I felt completely validated. And I know that not all white, cisgender, straight women do feel validated, right? Like there are people who have felt like their doctors didn't listen to them, but I imagine they're not wondering, would that have been different if my skin was a different color, right? And that's the piece that I keep coming back to in my mind, because I know from listening to other stories and listening to other people's experiences, that's not the experience. That is something that other people are questioning about their experiences. And that's unnecessary, right? It's an unnecessary evil of this that we need to lift off of, like, it needs to be lifted out of the situation. And that's why it's so important to keep speaking up and talking and elevating other experiences other than, one that looks like my own.
Ooh, that was good, Rachel. That was good. That was so good. I came in to this podcast today feeling just the heaviness of so much, and like hearing both you and Danyelle just show up in the space like both of you do is just brings me so much hope and lightness. It was like I could just sigh a little bit, breathe it out, and show up tomorrow in the space a little stronger.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for that. I want to just ask you before our closing question, I do have one thing that's been on my mind, is that you have a living child, Francis. What does Francis know about Dorothy?
Everything. No, not everything, but a lot. So we've been really open with her for as long as I can remember. And that was a conscious decision we made. That was something that we came to in therapy. As I said, my husband and I attended together. And, after the initial kind of raw grief support, as we found ourselves facing, pregnancy after loss, one of the conversations we would have during the pregnancy, but then more so after Francis was born, was, what is our family culture, right? Because one of the things we picked up on in therapy and worked with and looked at was the family cultures that we were brought up in, did not leave us in a place where we were equipped to cope with our losses, right? We needed to do some work. So we wanted to create a family culture where we could lift some of that, like do the work earlier on. And so, because we know everyone is bound to meet a loss in their life, right? Of some kind. And so we really wanted to create a culture in our family where we grieve, and we talk about death. And, it was a big part of my anxiety as a kid was I was so scared of death because nobody talked about it. And again, like I said earlier, you don't talk about things with me, I fill in the blanks and I fill them in with really terrible situations. So it's not easy, but it's better for me to just talk about it and just name it and say it. And so I wanted to raise Francis in a way where we just named it. And it wasn't easy, and it's still not easy. And it's really hard some days to, again, show up for this little person who is really committed now to talking about her sister and talking about how people die and why people die and what happens when you die. And there are days when I do have to model boundaries and say, I'm not in a good place to talk about this right now. I want to talk to you about this, but right now I want to do this. And then can we talk about this later? Right. And it's it's not that I don't want to talk about it, but also maybe right now while I'm cooking dinner is not the time and place for this heavy conversation. And so when she was little, a teeny baby, I have a picture of Dorothy. We have just one picture of Dorothy and it's on my nightstand. And when Francis kind of started talking, little babies are always into other babies. And she would see the baby and she'd ask me, baby, and say, yeah, that's Dorothy, baby Dorothy, and she's your sister. And I just talked to her, very matter of fact, this is Dorothy and she's your sister and she's baby. And then when she got to be probably, I don't know, almost 2 years old, she kind of one day, oh, Dorothy is what she's called her, Dorothy. And she pointed to Dorothy and then she said, Dorothy, kind of hands up, where is she? Right. And so I was like, well, she's not here and she doesn't live with us. And she kind of looked at me, and then I was like, she died. And she was like, not really saying anything because she's, barely 2, and she kind of toddled off. But then we kind of kept having that same little conversation. And then like over time, like she would layer in these other questions. And over the course of like these last, Francis is 4 now, over the course of these last 4 years, we've kind of laid the foundation of like, this is who our family is and this is what it looks like. And Francis is so sweet about her sister and really is a huge part in keeping her present in our lives and making sure that she's seen as a part of our family. For Father's Day, she drew a picture for her dad at daycare, and she included Dorothy in the picture. And that, that's just her. And our daycare provider is so supportive and is like really great about, like she doesn't question Francis when she talks about Dorothy, and she includes her as like Francis's sibling and things like that. And I think a lot of that too has to do with the fact that we've modeled it as a family, that that's what we want. We want our kid to be able to talk about her sister. And so that she knows a lot. We've had some moments where like wondering if we've gone too far or said too much. My husband, I actually just told this story in a support group last week. My husband, one night, Francis was asking about Dorothy dying, and Mike said, like, oh, well, she died because your mom got sick. And what did mom get sick with? And Mike was like, preeclampsia. And then she was like, what's preeclampsia? And then, like he was upstairs taking a long time putting her down. And then he comes downstairs and he's like, I need help. Like, he's like, we're in a weird place right now. He's like, I need you to come upstairs and explain what preeclampsia is and a placenta. And I just was like, okay, so maybe next time we just say like, mama was sick and she got better, right? But these are the things, like, I'm so grateful that we have a family that is having these conversations, and that I have a partner who is, we're both trying, and we're also like open enough with each other to be like, help, like I'm not explaining this in the right way, or I've gone too far, I need your help getting back on track. And so I'm really grateful that we've put the work in, and we're putting the work in, and it looks different for every family, but this is what we've decided is the best fit for our family.
Yeah. Oh, I love that story. I was on mute so people couldn't see, but I was chuckling because I could just imagine the two of you like, oh no, what do we do now?
It's like, what did you do? Okay, I guess I'll go upstairs and explain that at 8:30 at night. Like,
yeah,
what's going on up there?
It's so raw and real though, and I think that's what we love about you as a whole, right? Is that it's raw and it's real, and what a beautiful gift. I think any of us who are bereaved parents that openly talk about our experiences with loss and talk about death and dying, we're really giving our living children a gift to learn that, like, to not fear. This is a natural part of life. It's not this secret that doesn't get talked about. And we're giving them hopefully a space where if they are having fears or concerns that they can bring those up.
Well, and I feel like too, like, so I'm a kindergarten teacher, like that's my day job. And I just know from, running morning meeting at school, like when death comes up as a topic of conversation, everyone wants to talk about it, right? And like they want to talk about it in their ways. And so if a kid's, fish dies or someone's grandma dies, like we all, like, usually then I kind of know that for the next few minutes we're going to go around the circle and we're all going to share about a death or the time we heard about someone dying. And because kids they want to talk about this. And I feel like what I've watched is, as adults, because we want to protect kids, we shut the conversation down. But by doing that, what we're doing is saying this isn't a valuable conversation, or this isn't worth discussing. And it is worth discussing. And it's also okay as the adult to say, like, to lay the boundaries and be like, this is making me sad, or this feels like a lot, or I want to make sure everybody feels comfortable here. And, it's that transparency piece. It's so big for kids. And I'm like, I just imagine sometimes, because I have a lot of other lost family friends who I know are raising like these little grievers. And I'm like, what is that gonna, I don't know. I like to imagine like the positive impact that that might have on that generation of kids, that there are kids among them who are, open to these conversations and modeling it and comfortable with it. And like, what a great support I imagine they're going to be for the people in their lives.
Rachel, I so echo that. I had the opportunity to volunteer in my daughter's kindergarten class on Monday, and all the kids that she spends time with came and said, Danielle, do you know that Natalia has a sister that's passed away, that's dead? And I said, yes, I do know. And they said, Natalia tells us that her sister sends us butterflies. So the whole park is just covered in butterflies.
Yeah.
It's a nature kindergarten.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, that's what we talk about a lot. And she's like, yeah, I hope one day I have a sibling that sends me butterflies. And I was like, okay, like I don't want that for your family, but I understand where your heart is coming.
Yeah.
So to have my 6.5-year-old share with her class that not only does she have a sister, that this is what it is, and to be so matter of fact, and to have this conversation. I was just walking to the bathroom, like there was no prompt for them to feel free. And then Natalia, my daughter, comes running up and she's like, yeah, and you know what? My grandpa, my dad's dad, he died too this year. And so he also sends us butterflies. And it was just like, she gets it. And I always feel like if she gets it and your child gets it and we talk about it and she's sharing it with her friends, like this is a normal, everyday conversation. What a world are we changing? And so, yeah, it's just being open it's quite enlightening me to a different world and a different conversation.
Yeah. And it also like, I feel like the conversations in our household too, like they're not always heavy, right? Like sometimes they are what they are. Like this is our family and this is what our family looks like. And, we're very matter of fact about it. And sometimes Frances is like, she's very blunt about it. And that doesn't really faze us anymore, but it does, she's starting a new preschool in the fall and, we'll need to kind of do the work with those teachers to kind of let them know, like, she is going to say, like, if a kid talks about their sister, she's probably going to share, like, my sister's dead. And she's going to say it very matter of factly. And, or, sometimes she likes to say that Dorothy lives in the stars, right? So, like, she might talk about that. And, like, so what, like, my work as her parent is, like, I need to make sure that the adults around her are, building their comfort level with allowing those conversations to happen. And it sounds like your Natalia's teacher has fostered a community for that, and that is just awesome.
Well, I'll be honest, I have an older child who is a teen now, and I have had conversations with her teachers from grade 1, from the day that her sister passed away to pretty much grade 6. I had conversations every year saying, she has a sister, she is dead, she's going to have a conversation, we speak about this. If you have concerns, please come and talk to me. Otherwise, this is open. And so I didn't really do that going into kindergarten because Natalia introduced herself as, this is Natalia. I have a sister who sends me butterflies, and then I have an older sister. And she's so matter of fact that I'm like, I don't really need to say anything anymore because she's not hiding the story. However, I think that is something that you touched on, that as grieving parents and as lost parents, we actually have to have those conversations. Yeah. Because if we want our kids to speak about it, we have to let the adults in their life know that,
yeah. The same way as a kindergarten teacher, I will have parents like let me know if a parent has died, right? Like I've had students over the past few years whose dads have died, and like I'm really appreciative as a teacher when I know that, because kindergartners they're a mixed bag in terms of reliable information, and I want to validate as much as possible, but I also want to help them be grounded in reality. And so like I could see as a kindergarten teacher, like if you heard somebody talk about a sister, but you don't see that on paperwork somewhere, right? You would be like, oh, well, maybe you want a sister, maybe, and so it's really helpful. Like, I know when parents come and let me know, like, this is our family and this is what it looks like. And, this is who we talk about. And so it's, it's part of that work. And I think we're all better for it.
Very much agreed. And we could talk to you all day.
I know.
Literally all day. And so maybe we will have you back on, or we will continue this
That would be great.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yes, because I would so love that. We ask all of our guests a closing question before the end of the episode, and that question is: knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself then?
This is such a good question. And you asked me this when I did the keynote, and I've had a lot of time to think on it since then, because I just feel like it's such a great way to reflect on my grief, and also, like grieving as a whole. And I would say I would let me know that as alone as I feel, I won't be alone in this. But that doesn't mean I won't be lonely. Like, there are moments when, I have a community around me, but it still feels lonely, and that's okay. I also would let me know that my people are out there, and I will find them and they will find me. And I think, because that was my biggest fear, was being completely isolated from the world. And as somebody who, I know now has spent a lot of my life trying to fit in and find my place in this world, I felt like I'd been kicked out. Not so much with my miscarriages, but especially when Dorothy was stillborn, because I just didn't know where I would fit in anymore. So would let me know that it's going to be lonely. You're not alone. Your people are out there, and lean in to all of it. It's all valid. It's all important, and you deserve every. You've lost a lot, but you don't need to sacrifice, your value and your self-worth just because you've been through such a tragedy.
Beautiful. I love that. My people are out there. And that's my big takeaway from this episode of the podcast is that our people are out there, and you will find them and they will find you. And when it happens, it's beautiful. Like how I can talk to you all day. And then when that happens, it just brings so much hope and light into our lives, no matter at what stage we're on this journey. It's beautiful. So I love that. My people are out there.
This was amazing. Thank you so much to both of you. I really enjoyed my time with you today.
Well, thank you. And I know our listeners can't see us, but I will say to our listeners that there was a lot of head nodding from Danielle and I as Rachel was speaking. So if you resonate as much as we did with Rachel's words, you can again find her over at An Unexpected Family Outing. She's most active on Instagram. So head over there. And then, of course, if you're in immediate need of support, please visit our website, which will be in the show notes as well. So thanks for listening to Beyond the Loss, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.